so we return to chapter 3. We're about halfway through. Robert's family had owned Townsend's horologists for 5 generations. Its plain facade and classic sign did nothing to suggest the shrine of timepieces inside. Carriage clocks, pendulum clocks, cuckoo clocks and barometers covered every inch of wall, and at the back stood an old grandfather clock with a gold pendulum which had once belonged to Robert's grandfather. Front and centre was a panelled counter with a heavy silver till, behind which Robert spent most of his days. When the sun shone, as it did this morning, the glass-covered clocks threw patterns of light around the walls, and every day, irrespective of weather, they filled the shop with their ticking, their different timbres giving the place a percussive music of all of its own. Robert's da, Thaddeus Townsend, moved in time to this beat while he worked. A short man with delicate features, his watery blue eyes were enlarged by the thick magnifying glasses he wore to adjust the timepieces. People came to Thaddeus with all kinds of odd repairs. Not only watches and clocks, but other devices too, barometers, chronometers, musical snuff boxes, sometimes even simple mechanicals, and Thaddeus would take these things apart and attempt to fix them. If a machine intrigued him, he often took on the work for cost. A skilled mechanist, an engraver, and a dab hand at touching up miniatures, he enjoyed telling people how there was as much art in clockwork as in a beautiful sculpture or painting. His customers liked him because he cared. They came from all over the country to take advantage of his abilities, and never paid what the labour was worth. His da had so much talent. Robert wished he'd shut up shop and moved them somewhere where people would pay fairly for their work. Or he'd have dearly loved it if they could fix engines at the air station, or restore old mechanicals, but Thaddeus preferred the quiet life of Townsend's horologists. As things stood, Robert felt destined to be a clockmaker's apprentice forever, which was a shame, because he was simply no good at it. A bumbler, all thumbs and fingers, that was how he thought of himself. He was 13 now, and no matter how hard he worked, he could never manage the delicacy required for repairing the miniature mechanisms, or for dealing with the customers, come to that. It hadn't always been so. As a child, he'd been an enthusiastic pupil, nimble and quick, always wanting to learn things, but in recent years he found he'd grown clumsy, constantly misplacing tools or dropping important cogs down the cracks in the floorboards. This very morning, a mere hour after all the excitement with the men in the Fox, he had broken a valuable carriage clock, overwound it while he daydreamed about the mechanical and the airship, and when he looked up, he found the clock's teeth had sheared into the barrel mechanism. "How many times do I have to tell you?" Thaddeus asked, for what, at Robert's count, was the 113th time. "It's 7.5 turns. 1 wind is 7.5 turns." His da never usually raised his voice, but he did on this occasion. "Now I'll have to strip down the barrel and overhaul it. Why, the new parts alone will cost me more than my fee." "I'm sorry," Robert mumbled. "I must have miscounted." Thaddeus took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Few things in life are as fragile as clockwork, Robert. Learn to be more careful." Robert sighed and Thaddeus squeezed his shoulder. "Never mind. We'll make a clockmaker of you yet. But perhaps you'd better work behind the counter today, for a while, until you get your confidence back." Robert did as he was told, but a while turned into 2 long hours, then nearly 3. And the whole time the fox and the airship and the mutton-chop man with the mirrored eyeballs whirred around his mind like clockwork. Finally, after work, when he had a few spare minutes to himself, Robert put on his thick coat and cap and scarf and set out across the village. He passed the walled graveyard and chapel and the terraced air station cottages on their cobbled street before arriving at Pincher's Alley once more. He cut down along the scrubby track without a second thought. The rear windows of the cottages were dark. Robert glanced along the line of high back walls, looking for a place where he thought an injured fox might hide. Halfway up the lane, he noticed a gate ajar. Behind the gate was an old wooden shed, whose roof poked up over the line of walls. In there would be just the spot for a frightened fox. Robert stepped through the gate and crossed the yard, squeezing past a pile of rusted farm equipment to approach the shed. The lock had been broken off, recently, by the look of it, for the hasp hung loose by a couple of screws, and the patch of wood above the doorknob was gnawed with tooth marks and freshly exposed. Robert opened the door and, taking care to cover his mouth against the dust, crept inside. Oddments of wood leaned against the walls covered in peeling paint. Piles of newspapers lined a row of shelves, and the floor was strewn with packing cases. On an old table in the centre of the space, bottles clustered in glassy gangs, and above them cobwebs thick as knitting hung like hammocks in the dark apex of the roof. Robert looked around for the fox and saw its threadbare tail sticking out from behind a stack of boxes. He stepped round an old steamer trunk and caught sight of the rest of the animal curled up in the corner of the faded water-stained mattress. It was a scruffy-looking beast with glassy eyes and careworn fur that looked like it was molting in patches. A pouch and the mechanimal's unique winding key were hung around its neck. Robert crept towards it, but it didn't move a twitch. It was frozen still, unwound. Chapter 4. The coal bunker was freezing. Lily rubbed her goose-fleshed arms. Gradually, as her eyes adjusted further, she began to see more clearly. The space was not pitch black after all. In fact, a dim light came in through a mesh-covered ceiling vent. The arm sticking out from the pile of coal glinted in the soft glow. It was not a human, as Lily had first supposed, but an old broken mech limb. It must have belonged to some poor servant who'd got the chop. How horrible. Though it said one thing: no matter how bad life got, mechanicals had it worse. Lily stared at a cluster of dusty handprints on the concrete wall beside her, evidence of the bunker's past prisoners, miscreants all. She'd never fit in at this hateful school. Whenever she did something exuberant, she was punished for it. Admittedly, punching Alice had been a step too far. The other girls were sure to have it in for her now. But she needn't worry. She only had to survive a few more weeks, and then, at the end of term, Papa would come to collect her. Time drifted by, the light fading. Lily became vaguely aware of the crunch of footsteps coming closer. Yellow light slithered through the door slats, and when she heard a key turn in the lock, she lifted her chin from her knees. The door creaked open to reveal not the Kraken, whom she was expecting, but Gemma Ruddle, one of her annoying classmates, carrying a tallow candle. Lily shaded her eyes and stared at Gemma, who giggled with embarrassment. "Why, Lily, you look dirty as a duster." "Is my punishment over?" Lily asked. Cold and grim, she was in no mood for such teasing. "I don't know about that," Gemma said. "All I know is Miss Scrimshaw requests your presence in her study right away. I'm to take you to her." "What does she want, I wonder?" Gemma smirked. "Gracious, I've no idea. Would you like me to go back and ask her?" Then, without waiting for a reply, she trundled off down the narrow alley, back towards the school. Lily ducked through the doorway, pondering this worrying new revelation, as she followed the candlelight and the smoky scent of burning pig fat that trailed behind Gemma. They walked up the entrance steps and into the main corridor of the school, where Gemma blew out her candle, for the space was well lit, with wall-mounted gas lamps. Passing beneath one, Lily noticed her hands were flecked with coal dust. She looked around for a curtain or some chintzy upholstery to wipe them on, but there was nothing, and Gemma kept marching on. In the end, she decided to settle for the underside of her pinny and hope Miss Grimshaw would not inspect her appearance too closely, which was something the eagle-eyed headmistress was often wont to do. "Here we are," Gemma ushered Lily to a bench outside Miss Grimshaw's office. "You're to wait here until she calls you," she said primly, and before Lily could reply, she sloped off smirking. Lily was about to sit down when she noticed the soles of her boots had left dusty marks along the hall carpet. She quickly scuffed them away with her toe, then took her seat and waited to be called. 15 minutes passed, with not a peep from the study. What was taking them so long? Were they trying to conceive of some terrible new chastisement? A cold thought struck her. Maybe they were planning her murder. Then they'd sell her organs to the body snatchers, just like the ones in her penny dreadfuls. Or perhaps they planned a fate worse than death. Perhaps she was to be finally expelled. She edged towards the door and pressed her ear to the panelling, trying to hear what was being said inside. It was hard to make out because the thick oak surface muffled the sounds of the room. "It's a terrible state of affairs, I must concur," Miss Scrimshaw was saying. "But the truth is, I'll be glad to get her off of our hands. She's been quite difficult of late." "She's been difficult since she got here," the Kraken replied. And then Lily heard another woman's voice, a sing-song foreign accent she couldn't quite place. "She always was an unruly child," the voice said. "Some might say understandably, considering her past. She's been hidden and forced to live a lie. Her name, you understand." "Professor Hartman's wishes, of course. I'm not so sure myself. There are always these excuses. N'est-ce pas? She's bound to be worse, maintenant, with this terrible new turn of events. So I thought it best to take her out of the school until things are settled." "What things? What turn of events? Who was this person who knew her real name?" Lily pressed her ear harder against the wood, but the voices had dipped to a hushed tone. She had to hear more. If only there was a glass or something to put against the panel. She took a step back and glanced around the lobby, spotted a vase filled with dry flowers which stood on the side table. That would do. She tipped the flowers onto the table and was about to put the rim of the vase to the door when at the very moment it opened and the Kraken appeared. Her bulging eyes took in what Lily was up to, but instead of telling her off, she merely took the vase and, offering the briefest of sympathetic smiles, ushered her into the headmistress' office, closing the door behind her. Miss Scrimshaw was sitting at her mahogany desk, consulting a letter. Her hair was scraped into its customary bell-jar shape, and she wore a black dress with a dark blue ribbon collar. She glanced nervously at Lily before her eyes darted away. "Miss Grantham, or Hartman, should I say. Thank you for coming. Kindly take a seat." Lily walked across the expansive room towards the two high-backed chairs facing the desk. A woman in a voluminous black dress occupied one, her bony hands clasped in her lap. Though her face was obscured by the chair's headrest, her unctuous perfume filled the room with its sharp, overripe scent. Lily knew at once who she was. "Madame Verdigris, what are you doing here?" Her father's housekeeper leaned forward and gave Lily a wan smile, half hidden under a black gauze veil which covered her face. "Bonjour, chérie. Madame Verdigris has some news about your father," said Miss Scrimshaw. Straight away, Lily sensed it was something bad. So much black taffeta and poised concern. It was like the months in London after Mamma's death. Surely it couldn't be that. Could it? Not Papa, too? She felt bile rise in her throat and dug her nails into her palms. "What's happened?" she asked. Madame Verdigris shook her head sadly. "Ma petite, I am sorry to have to tell you this, but your father is missing. His airship crashed yesterday, flying home." "Perhaps you better take a seat," Miss Scrimshaw suggested. But Lily ignored her, gasping for breath. "C'est terrible," Madame's melodious voice continued. "The police, they have investigated the scene, but there was nobody, only the remains of his ship. He has disparu, and we have now to presume he is dead." "Oh no." Lily grasped for the chair, but it seemed to slide sideways. The woman's concerned faces swept away in a blur, and the floor lurched up to meet her. Silence. A square wooden box. A flash of white melting snow. The crack of breaking glass. A sharp, pungent smell mixed with a little perfume, with a brittle perfume. Lily opened her eyes, and the haze coagulated into Miss Scrimshaw's office. She must have fainted. She was lying on the carpet with Madame Verdigris kneeling over her, clutching a vial of smelling salts. She coughed and sat up, rubbing the sting from her eyes. Bien, chérie, Madame said. Lucky I had these. She wiped her hands on a lace handkerchief and stuffed the vial away in a clutch bag. Why you? Lily asked woozily. They'd been halfway through some sort of conversation. Why have you come? Oh, we can discuss this on the journey. Journey? Where are we going? Why, on to Breckenbridge, bien sûr, Madame said sniffly. She stood and brushed down the front of her dress. But I was to meet Papa, Lily said, and Malkin. A sickening dizziness swirled around her once more until she felt terribly confused. Papa promised to take me flying on Dragonfly. Tears came to her eyes and she pulled the oily hanky from her cuff to wipe her face. At the end of term, they're coming. He wants to fly me home. Mais non, Madame said. Obviously such things won't be happening. We are going home by public zepp, aujourd'hui. And we will have to hurry to catch the late one. And you will wait at the house with me until we receive news of your father, or until his body is discovered at the crash site. Good. That's settled then. Miss Scrimshaw took up the bell from her desk and rang. Within moments the door opened and the Kraken appeared. Ah, Mrs. McCracken, said the headmistress. Please could you ask Matron to help Lily and Madame Verdigris pack her things? I think her travelling trunks are in the storage room on the 3rd floor. Madame stood and adjusted the ruched sleeves of her dress. Ce n'est pas nécessaire, Miss Scrimshaw. Lily has plenty of clothes at home, don't you, Lily? She can just take a case and, what is she wearing? She glanced at Lily's dishevelled, coal-covered dress. Though perhaps something neat and black would not go amiss now. Eh, chérie? As they left the room together, Lily's mind was awash with fuzzy thoughts. But she couldn't help overhearing Madame tell the Kraken how, if the expense of forwarding Lily's things was too much, they should feel free to divide them up between the other girls. I'm not sure they'd want that, Madame, the Kraken replied. Perhaps the poorhouse, then, Madame muttered. Or burn them. And Lily had a sudden devastating inkling of what her new life without Papa would be like. The landing lamps of the descending airships glinted off the glass panes of the air dock's vaulted roof. The building towered above the sprawling city of Manchester like a giant steel ribcage. In its frosty forecourt, lines of steam wagons and the occasional horse-drawn carriage queued to drop passengers and cargo under the columned portico of the main entrance. Attached to the side of the building was a zeppelin-shaped billboard painted with the livery of the Royal Dirigible Company's fleet and the slogan, "The modern dirigible, travel that's lighter than air." As Madame Verdigris and Lily stepped down from the steam wagon, Madame almost slipped on the frosty cobbles of the road. She clutched Lily's arm, her nails digging through the wool of the school coat. Lily waited, clutching her small case and shivering in the biting wind, while Madame smoothed out the silk of her black dress. Finally, when she was ready, she took Lily's hand once more and ushered her into the terminal. Crossing the marble foyer, they passed rows of commuters waiting for their evening flights. The buzz of people was so overwhelming, Lily thought she might faint once more. The space held too many memories. She'd stood on this spot with Papa countless times, seeing him off on his trips. She glanced at the brass clock tower at the centre of the concourse, craning her neck to see its spire, which rose toward the lobby ceiling. Here she had kissed Papa goodbye, and here he had left her, with the Kraken and the other girls at the start of autumn term. She gazed past the pinnacle of the clock to the extravagant fresco of a zeppelin stamped with Queen Victoria's crest. Victoria. It was surrounded by angels and cherubs and tiny clouds, scudding away across the cracked blue plaster. At the corners of the lobby, 4 oval gilt-framed portraits of the old Queen faced each other across the expanse of painted sky. Was Papa up there now? Lily wondered. Lost somewhere in the wild blue yonder, with all of the other disappeared aeronauts? She stifled a sob and blew her nose with her oil-stained hanky. Madame Verdigris was consulting the overhead chalkboard filled with flight numbers, her bag held tight to her chest. C'est ici, quai numéro un. I don't know if I can do this, Lily said. Take a Zepp today, I mean. Her legs were buckling and her case felt heavy in her hand. She took a deep breath to steady herself. It will be fine, Madame said. Commuter Zepps are a most safe way to travel, not like private airships. She pursed her lips together. She seemed to have realised she'd overstepped the mark with that one. Allez, she said finally, and took Lily's arm and marched her to the gate. On the platform, they joined a line of people queuing to board the tethered passenger Zepp. Behind it, Lily glimpsed a floated dirigible waiting for its cargo.